In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense. In 2015, it still is Common Sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith. And this is Common Sense. Welcome back. Now that it's September, the kids are back in school, the Patriots are back on the gridiron, and the voters of Rhode Island are back to their watchdog role over elected officials who run the Ocean State. To help us with that last part, this week's show will present an in-depth interview Representative Patricia Morgan conducted with Gary Sasse of the Hassenfeld Center for Public Leadership, and they will talk about the Pawsox moving to Providence. As always, Jeff Richard will close out the show with his commentary on magazines in America. You can count on Mark and I to drop back in throughout the broadcast to pop the question, "Are you kidding me?" First, though, let's get things started with analysis of some of the stories affecting average Rhode Islanders as the summer of 2015 comes to a close. Mark?
Thank you, Elizabeth. This week, Channel 12 investigative reporter Ted Nesi updated us on a lawsuit against our state government that's been working its way toward a courtroom since January. Retirees of both AFSCME's Council 94 and the local chapter of the American Federation of Teachers have joined forces to seek injunctive relief from a Chafee administration change in their post-employment health care payments. The original contracts between the parties agreed that the state would cover 100% of the retirees' health care premiums. Governor Chafee's executive action changed that to a fixed amount, which doesn't even come close to covering premiums for hundreds of the state's pensioners. According to Ted Nesi's reporting, the state has an unfunded liability in retiree health care of some $918.8 million on a total $3.6 billion promise. If the plaintiffs prevail in this lawsuit, those numbers go even farther underwater. This is just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. It is a symptom of the bad management which has marked the Ocean State's elected leadership for decades. You don't have to be much of an actuary to add up all of the ever-increasing post-employment benefits which have been granted to state employees over the years to see that it is an unpayable number. You do have to be a strong, capable manager of public policy, however, in order to stand up for the citizens who elected you and hold the line, rather than promise something you know won't happen. Sadly, we haven't had either kind of political leadership in living memory. Liz, I hope those watchdog voters that you talked about at the top of the broadcast are up to the task that's before them.
Thanks, Mark. Buddy Cianci went on his radio show this week to give his unique perspective on Providence Mayor Elorza's travels to Central America. I took what he said with a bit of skepticism. Not that I don't trust Buddy, but what I heard from him was so outrageous, I thought, how could this possibly be? It was a few weeks ago when I covered Rhode Island as a sanctuary state. I also put out a hopeful statement saying, has Mayor Elorza restored the relationship between the Providence Police Department and ICE? I think we might have our answer. According to the Providence Journal, Providence Mayor Jorge Elorza traveled to Guatemala for a 4-day trip to discuss economic development with President Otto Perez Molina and other government officials. Elorza, Providence's first Guatemalan American mayor, was joined by Economic Development Director Mark Huang, State Senator Juan Pichardo, and TF Green Airport CEO Kelly J. Fredericks, according to a spokesman for the city. It's an economic development and heavy tourism focus, Elorza's spokesman Evan England said. Now, Buddy Cianci on WPRO made the assertion that including TF Green in the mix meant that a deal could be struck making TF Green the new direct flight hub from the Central American country. Now remember, I'm just speculating here, but now let's think about that for a minute. TSA does all the cavity searches and checking of ID on your way out of Rhode Island. Do you really think they'll check incoming passengers? Once they've left the airport, there's no way to know where or who they are. Now let me repeat. No one begrudges a person wanting to become a citizen of the United States. However, there are laws in effect that can and allow a person to become a citizen within existing immigration laws. If they pull this off, Mayor Elorza and others won't even be hiding this one-way ticket to illegal entry that I assume is fully sanctioned by Governor Raimondo. So I guess they'll have to call this new one-way flight connection Trespasso Airlines. Mark?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is all about the cash. That's how our home budgets work, and that's how the state of Rhode Island does too. This week, Randall Edgar wrote in the Providence Journal about the on-again, off-again efforts of state government to reduce waste and fraud. In a word, it's mostly off again. When Ken Block's famous report on waste and fraud in Rhode Island was finally pried from the clutched fists of former Governor Chafee, what it showed was a possible $200 million in savings, with no word on how much it would cost us to achieve those savings. All well and good, but our annual operating deficit is approaching $400 million per year. Meanwhile, there is no suggestion whatsoever that the state bureaucracy is even remotely up to the task of what current Governor Raimondo calls efficiency. So what's an Ocean State to do? Well, we should do what any first-year accounting student should do when looking at a balance sheet for the first time. Find the biggest number and start there. The biggest numbers on our state's balance sheet and P&L all have to do with entitlements. Now, don't recoil in shock and horror. Come on. Say it with me. Entitlements. Good. Try that yourself a few more times. It gets easier with practice. The next step in recovery is to realize that we do not have to call in the Grim Reaper to manage entitlement reform. We do not have to throw starving orphans or the incapacitated aging out into the nearest snowbank. What we do have to do, though, is review the eligibility of current recipients for the programs in which they are currently enrolled. How many have left the state? How many have had positive changes in employment or dependent or marital status? When Rudy Giuliani took over as mayor of the city of New York, he effected a 15 to 20% reduction in city welfare benefit payouts just by asking every recipient to come on down and reconfirm their eligibility. Rhode Island is smaller than New York City. It should be easier for us to do. By the way, 20% of our current annual total payments for entitlement programs is more than $400 million. There's the deficit right there. Okay. You and I both know our state government will do no such thing in the near term, no matter how efficient it would make us. But we can start in that direction by repeating after me, entitlements. Keep repeating. The more we say the word in polite company, the more likely we are to actually address the problem. Liz?
Thanks, Mark. Before we move on to the start of Pat Morgan's interview this week, let's take some time out for some Q&A. The question, by the way, is always the same. Are you kidding me?
Recently, Julie Negri wrote an op-ed for the Providence Journal, and Justin Katz followed up on it for Anchor Rising and Ocean State Current. Together, they pointed out that the State Board of Education is actively trying to divert state funds solely to a favored group of the state's high school students. Are you kidding me? It appears to be true. Under a program called Prepare RI, certain select high school students may qualify to take college courses for college credit at any state undergraduate institution. The cost to qualifying students will be zero for both tuition and books. Too bad only a fraction of the state's high school students will be allowed to apply. The distinction is not academic qualifications. Anyone taking a course for credit at URI has to demonstrate an appropriate level of scholarship. Now, this program is restricted to students from municipal public schools. Private school students, those from charter schools, mayoral academies, and anyone being homeschooled need not apply, no matter their grade point average. Justin Katz asked the question in his piece, what's the actual objective of this Prepare RI program? It is certainly not to give Ocean State high schoolers a leg up on their undergraduate work, because it doesn't apply to them as a group. So it must be a perk aimed only at students of municipal school systems, thereby promoting the traditional public schools with their botched traditional teaching programs. How many times have you heard me tell you that government fails as soon as it starts trying to select winners and losers? And how many more times am I going to have to ask government, are you kidding me?
Common Sense TV at the State House today. We're talking with Representative Sherry Roberts on a Wednesday, and it's not even legislative session. Representative Roberts, can you tell us the type of work that you do in a off legislative season?
Well, first of all, I'm here today because because of a bill signing that I was a co-sponsor of. It was a piece of sex trafficking legislation sponsored by Doreen Costa. I was the co-sponsor. But while I'm here, of course, I'm going to catch up on some other things that need to be done. And one of those things is preparing for session again in January, because during the summer, this is the time that you want to prepare that legislation, gain the support that you need, do the research, and all of that, so you can present that legislation in January.
Could you tell us how many hours a week you probably spend working for your constituents that they don't see during a normal session?
Honestly, I don't know if I could put a number on that. I can tell you that this is supposed to be a part-time job. This is a lifestyle. There doesn't seem to be much time, even for my own personal life, really. And that's not a complaint. I fully enjoy working for my constituents.
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. And today we have with us Gary Sasse, who is the founding director of the Hassenfeld Institute for Public Leadership, which is associated with Bryant University.
Part of Bryant University.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Gary, you've been around government and business and economic policy and financial policy, fiscal policy for a long time.
Yes.
You are considered one of our most clear thinkers and speakers about those kinds of choices, financial choices that the state makes. And over the last year, there's been an awful lot of discussion about moving the Pawsox from McCoy Stadium up here in Pawtucket a few miles south down to Providence. I mean, we all know that the first proposal was rejected by the governor, but what did you think of the first proposal?
Well, I thought it was absurd. I thought it was a proposal that put all the risks with the taxpayers of the state and all the profit with the owners of the Red Sox and the Pawsox. And so I think it just fell on its own weight. It was so obvious that people, saw this as the worst form of crony capitalism that the politicians backed off.
Yeah, when the late Mr. Skeffington was on the radio one day talking about it, he said they were going to use all private money to build the stadium. They were just going to need a lease from the state.
Well, anytime a developer or a business comes to you and said they just need a lease from the state, what that means is they're putting the state taxpayer on the hook to meet that lease. And sometimes that's perfectly fine because the lease performs and the owner of the business meets the obligations of the lease. But always keep in mind, if the business doesn't perform, if the economy goes down, if something unexpected happens, then the taxpayer has to step up to the plate.
The Rhode Island Convention Center Authority is the boondoggle that I was studying at the time, just by chance. We were starting a study of it, the Republican caucus, and we found out that even before the first shovel went into the ground, a lease had been signed with the authority. And exactly what you said, any money that the authority couldn't pay towards its bonds, the taxpayers were guaranteed to pay it. And it's been a bad deal.
And we need a more transparent, form of accounting, because there are two kinds of benefits from a public investment. One's the direct investment that the facility produces. Does it yield tax revenue? Does it generate enough money to pay off its lease? And then the argument is, well, by making that investment, there are also indirect benefits. So as a result of, and you've heard this argument, as a result of having the convention center, the proponents would argue there are more conventions, more people come to our restaurants, more people stay at our hotels. And there are multiplier effects with each project, but we never seem to get a transparent report to explain what that is and what the offsets are.
Yeah, anytime you folks hear there's been an economic impact study done, treat it with extreme skepticism, because it appears they are always rosy. Always rosy. I know you may disagree with me, but the economic impact studies that were done on the convention center said that it would be new revenue positive, let's use that word because we're going to talk about it in a minute. But in other words, it was going to start making money in the first year, and the taxpayers would never pay a dime. That was an economic impact study. So you cannot ever, to my way of thinking, you can never believe those studies.
Well, a couple of things. An economic impact study is only as good as the assumptions used, and you also have to be very careful of who is doing the economic impact
And
study.
who's paying them to do it.
Who is paying and who the consultants are. And I think it's critically important that we elect people to the legislature, elect people to the executive office that will come and have an independent look. And too many times an elected official says, I'm for or against this project, and the prophecy becomes self-fulfilling. And so we need more transparency. We have to make investments. We have to continue to compete, but we need to really ratchet up the way we analyze these projects.
Well, independent study, independent thought when it comes to them. It just can't be saying yes to get along or hiring your cronies.
Yeah, and that's what we depend. And we have a democratic system, and that's what we should be depending upon our elected representatives to do, is to do the independent due diligence, and then be held accountable for that due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. We always have to keep the people's best interests first.
Right, and keep it in
and
mind.
not necessarily the insiders.
Right, and then that's that's the issue. When you talk about what's in the people's best interest, there are honest, legitimate differences of opinion on the best way to proceed, and you have to respect those opinions, but you have to make certain that the way you operate is empirical, is fact-based, and you and I can disagree about a policy, but we shouldn't disagree about the facts.
Correct. All right, so in the last couple of weeks, there's been word that the new owners of the Pawsox have continued to try to negotiate a deal that would work. So, because they're bound and determined to get a new stadium built down on the 195 land. And Speaker Mattiello has talked about a term, revenue neutral. What does that mean to you?
Well, it doesn't mean anything to me until the speaker defines it. Revenue neutral for the taxpayer.
Sounds good.
Revenue neutral for the owners of the stadium. Revenue neutral for both. I would think revenue neutral would mean that because of the project, no one pays what they're not paying for right now. And at the end of the day, there are no financial, winners and losers. The project is revenue neutral.
So that would mean maybe that the Pawsox use all private money to build the stadium, that they're not looking for tax agreements, they're not looking for the state to do any infrastructure improvements. They're going to fund it all themselves. That would be revenue neutral to the taxpayer.
That, certainly that would have no impact on the taxpayer. It might even have a positive impact on the taxpayer if any business chose to make an investment the size of the investment required to build a stadium. As a practical matter, that doesn't happen.
No.
But in any project, if I'm going to locate a factory or an office building in a park, there's going to be a certain amount of public investment. Somebody's going to have to build a road to get to my factory. Somebody's going to have to put in the utility lines or help put in the utility lines. And those are public investments, and those are infrastructure investments that everybody makes to compete, to secure businesses to come to their state. I can't ask a factory to come here and not build a road so workers
build a road,
So there's a certain amount of public investment. So when you look at revenue neutrality, the question is, will the business produce enough revenue, either through indirect or direct measurements, so the project is revenue neutral, because there has to be infrastructure improvements. But you're asking me to fight with a cloud right now, because until the speaker defines what he means by revenue neutral, it's very hard to assess it.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Alexi. Wow, are you kidding me? I just got another job. I'm working here at this toll booth here in the interstate for the new transportation department. Yeah, it's called the Rhode Island Public Policy Enforcement Department Office for Funds. Me and all my friends get to stand in these toll plazas all over roadies, collecting money from, the ones that don't have a transponder. It's like welcome to the Ocean State every time you put your foot on the accelerator. Here comes one now. Look, it's got an Obama. They got an Obama sticker. Hi, how are you? Yeah, come on through. Go ahead. Go ahead. See ya. Oh, look. There's one without a state plate. Hi. Hi, where are you from? Oh, Nevada. Oh, hi. Yeah, that'll be $8 per axle. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my God! Oh my God! I see the Taylor Swift bus! Oh my God! Oh, I wonder how much I can get from her! Oh my God! I gotta call my ma! Ma! Guess what? The Taylor Swift bus is coming through! No! Ma! I'm at the toll plaza! Ma! Oh, are you kidding me?
What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore.
Welcome back. Today we're talking with Gary Sasse, who is the founding director of the Hassenfeld Institute for Public Leadership, and we're actually talking about the Pawsox, the proposed move of the Pawsox down to Providence. We just kind of talked about revenue neutral doesn't mean anything yet because it's not been defined.
You have to see the proposal, and then you can measure revenue neutral, whether and how it's defined. Correct? Yes.
But it sure sounded good, but obviously not good enough, because very shortly after the speaker said revenue neutral, he came out and he upped it and said it was revenue positive. But I think he, at that, as I read the article, he was talking about it being revenue positive over a long period of time, like 30 years. So just from a financial point of view, what does that term mean, revenue positive?
Well, revenue positive in the very simplest of ways means that there'll be a project that'll produce more income than you invested. There's a positive balance.
So there's profit for
there's profit,
taxpayers, or
the benefit for the taxpayers if it's revenue positive. Now, when you look at a question of something being revenue positive, you have to ask first over what period of time. As you pointed out, the speaker said 30 years. To me, that means it's revenue negative for a long time.
Yeah, it could lose money for 29 years.
And an interesting thing, after 30 years, the baseball park will probably be obsolete. So I'm not sure what he meant by revenue positive. The other thing about revenue positive, and it's easy to throw out the terms, but when you look at it from an economic point of view, you have to ask the question, what's the net value of money? What's the money going to be worth that you invest in year one going to be worth in 30 years? And when you do that kind of calculation, I have a very, very difficult time, projecting how something is revenue positive when you compare apples to apples. So we'll see.
Yeah, just for the folks who are watching, net present value kind of is a way that economists and financial experts look at money and the effect of inflation on money. So the dollar we spend today is actually worth more than the dollar is going to be worth in 30 years because inflation erodes that value every year. So that's just a term that actually came up an awful lot in the Finance Committee this year, which I was actually kind of upset about because I think they were saying, oh, we're going to refinance bonds and it's going to be, it's not going to cost the taxpayers a dime, NPV. Well, it is going to cost them a dime.
Yes,
it's going to cost them about 16% more.
Right. And
in real dollars.
And it's what the opportunity you could have made of that money from year one through year 30. So, I'm just very interested to see the proposal. I'm interested to really test what the speaker means by revenue positive. I think we have to, get behind the numbers, regardless of your philosophical position on the issue, and understand what the costs and the benefits are. But to make a statement, something's going to be revenue positive without telling us more, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, one of his comments were about sales taxes and stuff. And that also kind of was a red flag for me, because right now people are buying hot dogs and beers up here at McCoy Stadium. It would have to be more revenue,
Right, and that gets,
because they moved.
and that gets to the
You can't use the same revenue.
right, and that gets to the credibility of the consultants advising you, because the economic pro formas on the new project have to be based on assumptions. And if you use very rosy assumptions, then it would appear that in the out years you're producing more sales tax than you're producing at Pawtucket. If you use more conservative projections, you might not. So the legislature really has its work cut out for it in looking at those assumptions, not accepting a proposal because it comes from anybody, leadership included, and asking the question, what does a state gain if you move a business 5 miles south?
But it's gain, it's not, I mean, we'd actually have to take out what they're already making
Right,
from the one.
it's net gain, and then you have to understand the assumptions that the consultants use on attendance. You have to understand the assumptions the consultant uses on who goes to the game, what their disposable income is. There are a lot of things to factor in. So when you make statements, which really were essentially political statements at this time, it's revenue neutral, it's revenue positive, you got to see the white of their eyes. You have to see the details. You have to understand who the consultants were, whether they were independent or not, and then you have to apply a smell test to it. It's trust but verify. And so I'm anxious to see the proposal that the Pawsox and the Speaker come up with. I'm anxious to see how they define the terms that we've been discussing, revenue neutrality or revenue positive, and whether they're believable or not. And then we will see shortly if the proposal surfaces.
Okay, so I didn't give you this as homework, but I'm hoping you can answer the question. I'm going to be looking at the proposal. I think I know what I have to look at, but if you were to make a list of the most important things for me to look at, what would they include? I know one of them that I'm concerned about is this the highest use for the 195 land? Could we use it better?
Well, that's a critical question, because in a lot of ways we're putting the cart before the horse. Before you get into a question of whether you should adopt a proposal, you have to look at the question: is that the best use of the land? Now,
but that's an important part of it.
It's a very critical question, and with the new economic study that the Governor's Friends is sponsoring right now, hopefully it'll give us some answers. But is it the best use of the land? You have to understand what the legacy costs are to taxpayers in terms of relocating utilities, in terms of using land that was currently dedicated as green space or parkland for a stadium.
That utilities thing. I mean, there's a high pressure gas line that goes under the land. I think I heard originally it was something like $29 million to move it. Not inexpensive. Who would pay for that?
Yeah, and also there are environmental concerns of water runoff.
Sewers, yeah.
There are concerns about design. One of the issues that I'm very concerned about, because I really respect the integrity of local government, is this consistent with what the people in the city of Providence want in terms of design, in terms of zoning? And the state seems to be cramming the city on these issues, and I really look for the cities to have effective leadership to stand up for the interests of the taxpayers of the city.
Yeah, one of the things that really strikes me is Providence desperately needs to grow its tax base, because right now their tax levels are so high that I think it crowds out companies that might want to come. So if you're giving a cozy deal, for lack of a better word, but a tax-free proposal, how does that help the whole city expand its tax base and grow?
And that's why the zoning and design issues are interesting and important, because without seeing the proposal, there could be synergies where other things develop around the ballpark. But you have to look at that. And another question I would ask, which no one seems to have asked yet, or maybe they've asked it privately, there's an economic value to moving or not moving. And the economic value question is this: what should the state be prepared to do in the, I think unlikely, but in the event that the Pawsox say we're going to take our business and do business elsewhere? Is there a number? what is that number? What is that number based upon?
You mean what would we lose if they went to
Yeah,
Worcester or Hartford or some other place?
I don't think government does a very good job in picking winners and losers, but this isn't a business that's here right now.
Yeah.
If there's a chance...
And what do we get from them every year?
Right, but if there's a chance of losing that business, what are the costs? And then if we understand those costs, how do you structure a deal to put yourself in the state in a better competitive position? I'd like to know that. And the last thing I'd like to know is the assumptions that are being used on attendance, on demographics of the whole country.
Yeah, I think it's already very well attended because everybody has loved to go to the Pawsox game at one time or another up here in McCoy, which is why we'd like to keep it. Listen, we're going to take another break and we'll be right back with Gary.
This is an obituary, originally printed in the London Times. I'll try to do justice to the Brit who wrote it. But first, I have to ask a very American question. Are you kidding me? Today, we mourn the passing of a beloved old friend, Common Sense, who has been with us for many years. No one knows for sure how old he was, since his birth records were long ago lost in bureaucratic red tape. He will be remembered as having cultivated such valuable lessons as knowing when to come in out of the rain. Life isn't always fair. Why the early bird gets the worm. And maybe it was my fault. Common Sense lived by simple, sound financial policies. Don't spend more than you earn. And reliable strategies. Adults, not children, are in charge. His health began to deteriorate rapidly when well-intentioned but overbearing regulations were set in place. Reports of a 6-year-old boy charged with sexual harassment for kissing a classmate, teens suspended from school for using mouthwash after lunch, and a teacher fired for reprimanding an unruly student only worsened his condition. Common Sense lost ground when parents attacked teachers for doing the job that they themselves had failed to do in disciplining their unruly children. It declined even further when schools were required to get parental consent to administer sun lotion or an aspirin to a student, but could not inform parents when a student became pregnant and wanted to have an abortion. Common Sense lost the will to live as churches became businesses and criminals received better treatment than their victims. Common Sense took a beating when you couldn't defend yourself from a burglar in your own home, but the burglar could sue you for assault. Common Sense finally gave up the will to live after a woman failed to realize that a steaming cup of coffee was hot. She spilled a little in her lap and was promptly awarded a huge settlement. Common Sense was preceded in death by his parents, truth and trust, by his wife, discretion, by his daughter, responsibility, and by his son, reason. Not many attended his funeral because so few realized he was gone. Requiem in pace. Well, wait one. The London Times may believe all that, but here at a TV show named Common Sense, we sure don't. So we're not even close to throwing in the towel. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. Today we're talking with Gary Sasse, who is the founding director of the Hassenfeld Institute of Public Leadership at Bryant University, and calling upon all of his financial and public service over the course of time. We've been talking about the Pawsox Stadium deal, proposal, I guess, to move. And we were talking about what things we should be looking at when the deal finally is released to the public. What are the most important things for us to look at and to study to make sure that it really is in the public's best interest?
And one which we kind of skirted around but we haven't hit is, does it have a positive impact on jobs and tax revenue for the city and for the state? And when you look at peer-reviewed economic analysis, not economic analysis by consultants, just as the House is brought in, to
Sure, you get what you pay for.
or consultants the other side will bring in that'll be opposed to it. But these are academic peer-reviewed research, and they looked at 40 academic studies, the economics of sports facilities over 2 decades, and they really found that there was not a significant positive impact on jobs and on the economy from these kinds of investments. And so that's something that you guys in the legislature are going to have to drill down on, very deeply and understand that.
Let me just, so this is, academics have studied baseball stadiums or sports stadiums. Over the last 20 years? 40 years?
They looked at 40 studies that were conducted over the last 2 decades, correct?
Okay, and they found that there was no positive impact on job creation.
That's right. And you have to, and you can think about it logically. If we move the jobs from Pawtucket to Providence, are we going to need more hot dog vendors, more ticket takers? And so those people are employed. And to say it's creating new jobs is kind of silly because the state is so small. So if somebody was working at McCoy Stadium and they wanted to keep that job, driving 5 miles south would not be a detriment to maintaining that job.
Well, it's not going to create new jobs. It's just going to move them.
We have to see that, and I think you ask the question, what's the economic value? There are all kind of consultants looking at this. The House has their consultant. The I-195 district is looking at the best use of land.
But it's also about getting that independent look, which is what the academics have done. They don't have a horse in this race. They're just studying it.
And now we have Brookings, which is a leftist center think tank, coming in, being financed by some of the governor's friends.
The hedge fund managers.
Some of and look at the issues. So with all this information churning, it may be premature to make a decision because of the factors that we've been discussing during the show are real. They take time to figure out. Not easy to analyze, and so you have to sit back and say, okay, there's a stadium proposal. Might be a good idea, might be a bad idea. We all agree that heavy taxpayer subsidies is a bad idea. Let's sit back and let's get the facts, let's get all the reports, and let's make an informed decision or a judgment at that point. And ask yourself a question, why is it necessary in September of 2015 to make that decision, when the decision can just as easily be made in April of 2016, 6 months later?
Oh, I think we have a lot of time to make the decision. I don't think it has to be made overnight. I think that the owners wanted to stampede a decision. They said we had 60 days or they were out of here, but clearly that's not the truth. Because it's been more than 60 days and they're still here.
And the question is, where is the competition coming from? When people locate any business, but in this case a sporting facility, they look at the demographics for a certain conference. What are the incomes of the people? Are there enough people in that income bracket to buy tickets and support the team? And I haven't seen anybody else in New England raise their hand and volunteer for this public investment. Hartford recently did one, but Worcester, New Bedford, Fall River, 495. Where the question?
Well, they're already coming to McCoy Stadium. They're paying $8 a ticket here, right, and getting free parking. So we kind of know what the demographic is, but you're right. Where's the demographic that's going to make
where's a competitive,
the additional?
No, the question is, where is the competitive demographic? When the Pawsox say, which they did say, we have to make a decision in 60 days or we're leaving, I have one question. Where are you going to?
Where are you going to? Oh, I see what you're saying.
And when you look at you have to compare the demographics, because we have a very favorable demographic for a minor league baseball team. We have a stadium.
Clearly, I think it's well attended here at McCoy.
Right, the attendance has been dropping, but it's a facility that they're not paying taxes on. It's free parking. So the question is, who is going to give you a better deal in New England? And to this point, no one that I know of has come up. I don't know who our competition is. If I'm making a business decision, I'd like to get some intelligence of who our competition is.
Yes.
Don't know.
What other city is bidding for the Pawsox team?
Because too often we negotiate with ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and when I was looking at the deal originally, the first proposal, it appeared to be like a $250 million investment from taxpayers between building the stadium and moving the infrastructure and giving them the free taxes down there. That's an enormous amount of corporate welfare, in my opinion. They're very wealthy men. Why should we be guaranteeing them a profit? And that was always just something that stuck in my craw, because we shouldn't be asking my elderly constituent who never goes to a baseball game to subsidize these very wealthy men, making sure they get a profit from their investment.
I agree. I don't know I didn't do the math to know what the bottom line number was, but clearly the taxpayer was footing the bill, taking all the risks. They were making the profit. That's off the table. The unfortunate part is we don't know what's been put on the table right now.
Yes, we don't know yet. We absolutely don't know. Just going back to the idea of getting the highest and best use from that 195 land, we've always talked about it as being a place where we bring in year-round jobs, right? Diverse jobs, entry-level, CEO, everything in between. It's hard for Providence to attract businesses because their tax rate is so high. And you can't get that tax rate to come down unless you grow the tax base.
And Providence, unfortunately, is the chicken and the egg. Providence has, I think, now the 4th highest commercial tax rates.
In the country?
Yes, in the country. Angel, Dolores, I think, did the right thing by freezing commercial rates a few years ago, and that policy continues. But in order to attract investment in the state, we give everybody a very significant tax stabilization agreement or a tax break. So we're attracting business, and yet the residential, the homeowner, is not getting the benefit of the tax base expanding because no one comes here without getting a tax holiday or a tax break.
Sure.
And that has to be looked at very carefully because every investment is not equal. And so if we were going to expand the economic base of the city, which we have to, we also at the same time have to grow the tax base. So there has to be balance between using tax incentives to encourage people to come here and being competitive, but at the same time realize you need money for schools, you need money where you don't drive in middle-class homeowners out of Providence.
To me, it's if you are using that land unwisely or for a lesser value, then you can't grow the tax base. You just can't.
But keep in mind,
you want to make sure that you're bringing in those diverse industries, the year-round jobs.
Keep in mind that land, I understand, was for green space, and so you have to know, which we don't know, if you build a ballpark there, are you going to have to take other acreage out and exchange that for green space?
And does it slow down the whole process of getting companies to come?
And that's the economic question. If you don't have to dedicate other land for green space, then you really haven't given up, very much in terms of its value at that point.
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
We're going to take one more break, and we'll be right back.
Providence Mayor Elorza takes lessons from one bad dude while his city is in shambles. Are you kidding me? As I mentioned earlier in our news analysis, Providence Mayor Elorza thought it would be a great idea to travel to Guatemala for a few days to meet with its soon-to-be ex-presidente. According to Russell Moore of Go Local Prov, by all accounts, Guatemala President Otto Perez Molina is one bad dude. His vice president stepped down over a kickback scheme over imports into the country run by his own personal secretary. Molina's son-in-law was arrested for drug trafficking last month. And Molina himself is suspected, has been accused, and all but implicated in war crimes during that country's civil war during the 1980s. If it weren't for the fact that a national election is taking place in Guatemala next month, and the fact that Molina isn't up for re-election, the president would, by most accounts, have been thrust out of office. Like so many of the rest of us, Providence City Council President Luis Alpont thought it was crazy that Elora decided to meet with such a scandal-ridden administration. How come no one Googled this guy, Alpante wondered. The first 5 things that come up are related to corruption, unquote. All this after Mayor Elorza went after former Mayor Buddy Cianci in last year's election and led the campaign against the former mayor's relatively minor corruption in comparison. Proof positive that once you're in office, you can do whatever you want. Citizens be damned. Hipocrita. ¿Estás bromeando?
Welcome back. Today we're talking with Gary Sasse, who is the founding director of the Hassenfeld Institute for Public Leadership, which is at Bryant University. And we've been talking about the Pawsox Stadium. Gary, we've kind of been picking over the things that everybody should keep in mind as we start looking at this new proposal whenever it comes out. There have been some op-ed pieces in the Providence Journal talking about the wonderful benefits to San Diego and Baltimore from having a new stadium put in there at public expense, I guess. I guess it was at public expense. But one of the things that occurs to me is Baltimore and San Diego are major league teams. Mm-hmm. Real different from...
What's apples to oranges? I was in Cleveland last week for the debate, and I went over to see the Indians play, and they have a fairly new ballpark downtown Cleveland.
I've been there.
And you can't compare a major league facility to a minor league facility. And people should keep in mind when we're talking about relocating the Pawsox, we're talking about relocating a minor league, baseball team.
It's minor league.
And the economic values of it are very different.
Way different from a major league team. It's not the Red Sox, right?
No, I think I would be for tax subsidies to get the Red Sox to move down here. Need a little bit of
I
consistency.
think everybody would be at that point. They also had, or recently, the new owners of the team invited a lot of people to go down to Durham, North Carolina. I know you followed that much more than I did. What were your thoughts about that?
My impressions first was that Kate Bramson, who writes the Providence Journal, did an excellent job of reporting what happened and the comparison. It wasn't just about the stadium. If you go to Durham, Duke University is located in Durham, and it's part of the Research Triangle. So they have spent decades developing their innovation, their Research Triangle facility, and so the ballpark it was there, and that could support the economy. So the economy of the Durham Research Triangle area is stronger than our economy. The economic base is different. The research was already there. The other thing that was so different, there were other attractions and amenities around the ballpark. There was an old American tobacco facility, and that was converted into mall and exhibits. So you had a research triangle, a strong economy. You had other attractions in the area that were already there, and so a ballpark, could fit in. But that comparing Durham to Providence is again comparing apples to oranges because what's developed. The other thing which nobody likes to talk about in the state, and you had mentioned this, the cost of doing business in North Carolina is different than the cost of doing business in Rhode Island. And so when you look at the attendance, the cost, comparing Durham to Providence, I don't think was a relevant comparison.
Yeah, I know North Carolina is booming right now, and I would pretty much bet that Durham doesn't have one of the 10 highest commercial property tax rates in the country.
I can guarantee
I think we can probably guarantee you that.
And they've also spent decades developing their research triangle, which is something that we're trying to emulate.
Yeah, but we haven't done it yet.
But theirs was there first, before
Yeah,
the
theirs has been there for decades, exactly. Well, my bottom line also is, after we look at everything and vet it properly, I still think the people need a chance to vote on it. It's their money. So I'm going to keep pushing for that. And there's time for them to do a referendum.
And let me tell you why that's so important. In the past, we could sell general obligation bonds. Those were required of other people. Revenue bonds were backed up by a revenue stream, which sometimes materialized, sometimes didn't. And then we got the strange creature, which was 38 Studios moral obligation bonds. Standard & Poor's and Moody's held us captive, and no one in the state had the guts to fight back. And they basically said...
I keep fighting.
You're accepted. They basically said that even though it was a moral obligation and you weren't legally obligated to pay it, it had no different impact on your credit worthiness as a state than it was if it was a general obligation bond. So if that's the case, if that's the interpretation of the different forms of debt...
Same with the revenue bond.
Right. Then the reason to protect taxpayers that we were required to vote on general obligation bonds if there's a difference without distinction as far as our credit rating agencies and the financial community is concerned, I think it's about time to talk about voters approving all debt.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you on that. But now we're going to change gears here a little bit. You're the state chairman for the campaign for Marco Rubio for president. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of time to talk to us about why you decided to champion him in our state.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say is that the Republican Party, currently is blessed with a lot of very good candidates. And so my decision to support Marco, which was unusual because, in the past, I have not politically been out front on candidates. Before I got involved, I spent a lot of time, looking at his plans, what he had proposed, were they specific, were they doable, his leadership. People forget that he was leader of the Florida House for 5 years, which was not an easy job. His record on the Senate, particularly his record on...
Did a great job in Florida.
And foreign policy, So a good track record, very practical proposals. And what he is really talking about is a new generation of leadership. One of his key proposals, his economic proposal, is unlocking American innovation. And we know that government by itself can't unlock innovation. It has to come, from the private sector. We have to create opportunities. And I think he does the most for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, to make sure that an opportunity that I had exists for them. And that in a nutshell is why I'm supporting Marco Rubio. I think he is the future.
And that's the case that he makes. I think he's this is not an endorsement.
Well, we should get you there. Come on, let's go. We can do it.
But I think he's a very attractive candidate. And one of the things that I think that he can remind us of, just through his personal story, is what the American dream really is. It's about, to me, it's about people of modest means being able, through hard work, good decisions, to rise. I mean, his mother was a maid? Is that right? His mother was a maid, his father...
Bartender.
Was a bartender. And look at him now. He's running for the President of the United States.
And if you look at it, just one last thing, if you look at his issues on higher education, he wants to fix it. He wants to break the cartel that's controlling accreditation, which makes it harder for kids to apply what they learned to getting a real job. He wants to make student loan payments proportional to income. His tax policies, outside of tax simplification and tax reform, reducing rates, they're very family-centered. He's talking about doubling the child tax care credit. He's talking about getting rid of the marriage penalty. So there's a wholeness. There's a recognition that economic and social issues are tied. I mentioned his jobs program of unlocking innovation. I think the speech he gave in New York recently to the Foreign Affairs Council, really shows the foreign policy.
I've heard him comment more about foreign affairs than on the other proposals, I'll be honest with you. But I've always been impressed that he has got such command of the issues and how to restore America's place in the world. I just think we've been diminished over the last many years. I think our friends don't trust us and our enemies don't fear us. And he talks about peace through strength, not in peace through withdrawing.
No, it's very Reagan-esque, his foreign policy. And Reagan and George Bush, did a lot to win the Cold War. And I think you're right. I think he also, and this is what really attracted me to him, and I'll use it in just an economic metaphor.
We've got only a few more seconds.
So he basically says that our economic challenges have changed, but our economic policies have not. And that through his leadership, we can become change agents going forward. Because the last time we really talked about change in this country was with the New Deal. Everything's built from that. And the world is a very different place today. Very
different, and we need to prepare for the next generation. I agree with you. I have grandchildren too, and I want them to have what I had.
Well, get on board with Rubio.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I'll look forward to hearing more from you.
Good to see you.
How often do you focus on your mail? Well, daily, of course. But specifically, what's in your mail? Now, I decided to pay attention to the magazines we get at my house. My wife and I get 15 different mags, some weekly, bi-weekly, some monthly, some quarterly. They pile up someplace because we both know we are going to get to them sometime soon. Now, occasionally we have a solitary moment to read, most frequently in the family reading room. Eventually we get rid of them. Some donated, others recycled. Now, I got to considering what the rest of you are reading. So I went to Wikipedia. The Wiki folks have done an incredible job of listing not only the current roster of U.S. magazines, but they have gone back and cataloged the ones that have come and gone. Some gone forever, others archived for online perusal, should the curious be so motivated to read them. I first looked at the current list. Wiki broke the list down into 43 different categories of magazines. In the 43 were 709 different titles. I wondered how the categories compared with each other for total numbers of mags, so I picked a few to review. Now, Wiki not only lists the names, but provides an annotated bibliography of each. They tell you who started the magazine, what they write about, how many subscriptions. It's very telling to see how some people are earning a living writing for, and the folks who publish the magazines of America. And of course, there's the printing and distribution. There are lots of jobs in this industry. Top 10 categories. You knew this one. Religion, 51. Number 2, entertainment and arts, 46. Music, number 40, has 43. Politics, 40. Now, I'll get back to that one in a minute. Number 5 is business and finance at 32. 6, hobbies and interests at 31. Number 7 is lifestyles with 28. Sports, 27. Computers and technology, 25. And last of the 10, health with 24. Broken down by men, women, and general. Now, guess who gets the most attention? Well, there are 16 women's and 5 men's. Okay, guess that tells you what gets the most attention in this world. It seems there is a magazine for every possible human interest. Now, I took a special interest in the political mags. Now, Wiki folks decided to tell me up front where each one fell in the political spectrum. Now, I didn't have to read the individual annotated write-ups, but could skip that part and discover up front what ideology I might want to go for. So it went like this. I could read conservative, liberal, neoconservative, nonpartisan, progressive slant liberal, Christian conservative, libertarian, Jewish left, pacifist, Jewish feminist, arts, left, center right, Christian, and a couple of other choices. I want someone to tell me exactly what each of these terms really means. Now, I see a PhD in political science when that job is done. Someone at Wiki must have had a fun time figuring out where each of these magazines is making its subscription money. Here's a tale. How about the North American Review? That one was the first literary magazine in the United States, founded in Boston in 1815. Now, this story is a great American history tale. It includes the part where poet Robert Dana rescued the NIR in 1964 and based it at Cornell University. Apparently, he had to negotiate with no other than our very own Senator Claiborne Pell, who asserted that he had the rights to the magazine. Now, NIR moved to the University of Northern Iowa, which it is still there. And there are many great stories of how our current crop of magazines evolved. You'll have to get to Wiki to read them. It is abundantly clear that we Americans like to write, but these mags are businesses, and all businesses do not succeed. The Wiki folks told me that 730 magazines started and then went away. Some resurrected with new names. Now, I was curious as to why these literary gems disappeared. I picked a couple to review. How about The Country Gentleman? What is The Country Gentleman? Well, between 1831 and 1955, it was an agricultural magazine founded by Luther Tucker. He was bought out in 1911 by Curtis Publishing Company. They focused the magazine on the business side of farming. It became the second most popular agricultural magazine in the country, had a circulation of almost 3 million. But of course, in 1955, it was purchased by the Farm Journal, and so it goes. Startup to bought out, and that's the way we do things even today. One last thought. Did you know there was a magazine called Trump? That one was a glossy magazine of satire and humor, edited by Harvey Kurtzman and published by Playboy's very own Hugh Hefner. Lasted for 2 issues, produced in 1957. It's really a great history story. Thanks for watching, and God bless.